The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal. Representatives from 400 different species sat in floating chairs arranged in perfect circles. Each being looked different from the next. Some had tentacles instead of arms. Others had 3 heads or skin that changed colors. But they all shared one thing. They thought they were better than humans. Ambassador Zexathari stood at the center podium. His tall, thin body moved like liquid metal as he spoke. His voice carried to every corner of the massive room through translation devices that turned his words into sounds each species could understand. "Honored Council," Zexathari began, his voice smooth as silk. "We gather today to discuss the application of species designation 7834C. They call themselves humans." A low murmur ran through the assembly. Many council members had heard whispers about this new species. None of the whispers were good. Zexathari activated a holographic display above his head. Images of Earth appeared. Cities burning, armies fighting, oceans filled with plastic waste. The pictures showed humans at their worst moments throughout history. "Observe their world," Zexathari continued. "In the past century alone, they have fought 2 global wars. They have created weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They pollute their own air and water. They cannot even agree on basic facts about their own reality." A council member with blue scales and 4 arms raised a hand. "What about their technology? Surely they must have some advanced capabilities to reach space?" Zexathari made a sound that might have been laughter. "Their rockets still use chemical fuel. Their computers are barely more advanced than counting devices. They have not even learned to harness the power of their own star. Most shocking of all, they still use paper money in many regions." More murmurs filled the hall. Several beings shook their heads or made gestures of disapproval with whatever limbs they possessed. "But perhaps," said a crystalline being whose voice sounded like wind chimes, "they have strong minds, mental resilience that could be developed?" The hologram changed to show psychological evaluations. Charts and graphs filled the air with data about human mental health, stress responses, and emotional stability. "Their minds are perhaps their greatest weakness," Zexathari replied. "They suffer from conditions they call anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. Simple changes in their environment can cause complete mental breakdown. They require constant sleep, 8 hours out of every 24-hour period. Without this sleep, they become irrational and dangerous." A gaseous being that looked like a small storm cloud floated forward. "What about their physical capabilities?" "Pathetic," Zexathari said without hesitation. "They have no natural armor, no claws or fangs, no poison or defensive capabilities. They cannot see in the dark. They cannot breathe underwater. They die if exposed to the vacuum of space for more than 15 seconds. Their bones break easily. They cannot even digest most plant matter without cooking it first." The images changed again, showing humans struggling in various environments, people collapsing from heat, shivering in cold, gasping at high altitudes. "Most telling of all," Zexathari continued, "is their response to stress. When faced with challenges beyond their ability, humans do not adapt logically. Instead, they experience what they call fear, a chemical reaction that makes them either run away or become violent. This fear response makes them completely unreliable in crisis situations." A being covered in thick fur and sporting 6 legs stood up. "Have any humans attempted galactic travel before?" "A few have left their solar system," Zexathari admitted. The results were instructive. When exposed to the reality of galactic civilization, the vast distances, the alien nature of other worlds, the complexity of interspecies relations, they uniformly experience what their medical professionals call existential crisis. They become unable to function, often requiring medical intervention. The council chamber fell silent as members processed this information. Finally, the chief moderator, an ancient being whose species had founded the Galactic Empire 12,000 years ago, spoke. "The evidence seems clear," the moderator said. "Humans lack the basic requirements for galactic citizenship. They cannot survive our environments, understand our technologies, or maintain mental stability under cosmic pressures." Zexathari nodded. "I propose the decree of exclusion. Humanity should be forbidden from galactic contact until they can prove they have evolved beyond their current limitations. Based on our analysis, this will require at least 10,000 years of development, if it is possible at all." Council members began to vote. Green lights appeared above each representative as they agreed with the exclusion. The voting seemed unanimous. No species wanted to deal with weak, unstable, primitive humans. But in the observation gallery far above the main floor, two figures sat quietly in the back row. Dr. Elena Volkov wore simple gray clothes that hid her muscular build. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style. Her eyes, cold and calculating, watched the proceedings with interest. Beside her sat Marcus Chen, a man whose relaxed posture fooled people into thinking he was harmless. His smile never quite reached his eyes. Both humans had been granted observer status through a bureaucratic error. They were supposed to be studying galactic law, not watching their species get rejected from the cosmic community. 417 votes for exclusion, the moderator announced. 0 votes against. The decree is unanimous. Humanity is deemed unsuitable for galactic civilization. Elena and Marcus looked at each other. Without speaking, they both slowly raised their hands. The gesture was small, but the translation computers picked it up. A soft chime indicated that someone in the gallery was requesting recognition. The chief moderator looked up, confused. Observer status did not include voting rights. The computer system checked and rechecked, but the signal was clear. 2 beings in the gallery were requesting to address the council. Who dares interrupt the formal vote? Scifistories demanded. Elena stood up. Her movement was smooth and controlled, like a predator rising from rest. Dr. Elena Volkov, representing humanity. I request permission to address the council's findings. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Several council members demanded to know how humans had gained access to the sacred halls. Others wanted the security forces called immediately. Marcus also stood. His voice carried clearly across the noise. Marcus Chen, also representing humanity. We formally dispute the council's conclusions and request the right of trial by ordeal. The ancient laws of the Galactic Empire were clear. Any species facing exclusion could demand trials to prove their worth. It was an old tradition, rarely used because most species were too wise to risk the consequences of failure. The chief moderator raised a hand for silence. You understand what you are requesting? The trials are designed to test the absolute limits of mental and physical endurance. Most species fail within hours. Those who fail face not just exclusion, but the complete erasure of their species from galactic records. Elena's smile was sharp as a knife blade. We understand perfectly. Marcus nodded. We accept all risks and consequences. Scifistories looked like he wanted to object, but the law was the law. The council voted again. This time, they voted to begin the trials that would either prove humanity's worth or destroy any chance they would ever have of joining galactic civilization. Neither Elena nor Marcus seemed worried about this prospect. If anything, they looked eager for the challenge. The galaxy was about to learn something new about humans, something that did not show up in their files or psychological profiles, something that could only be discovered when humans were pushed beyond their breaking point. The trials would begin in 3 days. 3 days passed quickly. The news of humanity's challenge spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Betting pools opened on every civilized world. The odds were simple. No one bet on the humans surviving more than 6 hours. Elena and Marcus spent those 3 days in a small room provided by the council. They did not seem nervous. Elena read scientific journals about alien biology. Marcus practiced meditation techniques he had learned during his military training. They ate simple food and slept normal hours, as if they were preparing for a vacation instead of trials that could kill them. On the morning of the first trial, thousands of beings gathered in the council chambers. Others watched through broadcasting systems that reached every corner of galactic space. It was estimated that over 2 billion intelligent beings would witness humanity's failure. The chief moderator explained the trials to the assembled crowd. The candidates will face 4 tests, each designed to break the spirit and body of any sentient being. First, they will survive alone in the void gardens of Kethmore, where reality itself becomes unstable. Second, they will endure the psychic storms of Nexus Station, which drive most species to permanent madness. Third, they will navigate the death maze of the architect species, which has claimed over 3,000 lives. Finally, they will face judgment in the court of absolute truth, where lies become physical pain. Scifistories stood near the human observers. His expression showed barely hidden pleasure. Each trial has been attempted by representatives of dozens of species over the centuries. The survival rate is less than 12%. Most beings last less than an hour before begging for rescue. Elena checked her equipment one final time. She carried only basic scientific instruments, a scanner, sample containers, and a notebook made of paper. "How many species have completed all 4 trials?" she asked. "None," the moderator replied. The record holder was a warrior from the Titan clans. He survived 2 complete trials and half of the 3rd before his mind shattered completely. He now lives in a care facility, unable to speak or recognize his own offspring. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "What happens if we succeed?" The question caused nervous laughter throughout the chamber. The idea of human success was so unlikely that no one had seriously considered it. "If you somehow survive all 4 trials," the moderator said, "humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Empire with all rights and privileges. But we must warn you, failure means more than just exclusion. Failed candidates often die or suffer permanent mental damage. Their species is then forbidden from ever attempting the trials again." Elena and Marcus looked at each other and shrugged. They had heard worse odds before. The first trial location was accessed through a portal system that could transport beings instantly across the galaxy. The void gardens of Kethmore existed in a region of space where normal physics broke down. Reality shifted constantly. What seemed solid could become gas. Up could become down. Past and future sometimes exchanged places. Elena stepped through the portal first. She emerged in what looked like a beautiful garden filled with impossible flowers. The blooms were made of crystallized music and grew in soil that sparkled like starlight. But she knew better than to trust appearances. Within minutes, the garden began to change. The flowers turned into twisted shapes that hurt to look at. The sky became an ocean filled with swimming stars. The ground beneath her feet turned into a mirror that showed not her reflection, but her deepest fears made visible. The mirror showed Elena as a child, hiding in a basement while bombs fell on her city. They showed her first kill as a soldier, a young man not much older than herself. They showed her teammates dying in a mission she had planned. They showed every moment of guilt, fear, and pain from her 43 years of life. Most beings who entered the Void Gardens ran screaming from these visions within minutes. The psychological assault was designed to overwhelm any rational mind. Elena pulled out her notebook and began writing. She walked closer to each mirror, studying the images with scientific curiosity. She cataloged the type of fear each vision represented. She noted how the garden's reality distortions affected the emotional impact of the memories. She even took samples of the mirror material for later analysis. "Interesting," she said to herself, speaking into a recording device. "The reality distortions appear to access memory through quantum entanglement with brain tissue. The emotional amplification suggests manipulation of neurotransmitter production. This is actually quite elegant technology." Hours passed. The garden tried different approaches. It showed her possible futures where everyone she cared about died. It created physical manifestations of her fears. Spiders the size of houses, endless dark tunnels, the faces of people she had failed to save. Elena treated each new horror as a research opportunity. She measured the spiders, mapped the tunnels, and conducted psychological interviews with the manifestations of dead people. Her scientific training had taught her to observe without being overwhelmed by emotion. Her military background had taught her to function despite fear. The garden's attempts to break her became more desperate. It created scenarios where she was trapped forever, where reality itself was ending, where she was already dead and just did not know it yet. Elena made more notes. She began to understand the underlying principles that made the garden work. By the end of 12 hours, she had filled 3 notebooks with observations and collected 17 different samples of impossible matter. When the portal opened to extract her, Elena was sitting cross-legged on the ground, writing equations that described how fear could be converted into physical matter. She looked up at the rescue team with mild annoyance. "Could I have a few more hours?" she asked. "I am just beginning to understand the mathematical principles involved here." The rescue team, composed of heavily armored beings trained to extract broken and screaming trial candidates, stared at her in confusion. They had expected to find a catatonic human, not a scientist making breakthrough discoveries. Elena packed her materials and walked through the portal back to the council chambers. She immediately went to a corner of the room and began organizing her notes. The watching galaxy fell silent. Commentators who had been describing Elena's inevitable breakdown found themselves with nothing to say. Betting systems crashed as millions of beings tried to change their wagers at once. Zexathari approached Elena with disbelief written across his features. "How?" he asked simply. Elena looked up from her notes. "Your garden is based on flawed assumptions about human psychology. You assumed fear would paralyze rational thought. But humans have learned to use fear as information. When we are afraid, we pay closer attention. We think more carefully. We plan for worse situations." She returned to her notes. "Also, this was an incredible research opportunity. I have never seen reality manipulation on this scale before. Do you think I could get copies of the technical specifications?" The council members looked at each other in confusion. This was not how the trials were supposed to work. Marcus was scheduled for the psychic storms the next day. The betting odds had shifted slightly after Elena's success, but most beings still expected human failure. After all, the psychic storms were completely different from the reality distortions of the Void Gardens. No one was prepared for what Marcus would do when faced with the chaotic mental assault of alien thoughts and emotions. No one understood that humans had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to survive in groups, to understand the minds of others, to function even when surrounded by conflicting information and hostile intentions. The galaxy was about to learn something new about human adaptability, something that would change how they viewed not just humanity, but the nature of intelligence itself. Marcus stood at the entrance to Nexus Station, a massive structure that floated in the space between galaxies. The station served as a hub for psychic research, where the mental energies of thousands of species had been collected and studied for millennia. The accumulated thoughts and emotions had created what scientists called psychic storms, chaotic waves of alien consciousness that could overwhelm any unprepared mind. The observation deck was packed with beings from across the galaxy. After Elena's unexpected success in the Void Gardens, interest in the human trials had increased dramatically. Many spectators had traveled for days just to witness what they assumed would be Marcus's mental breakdown. The psychic storms contained the raw, emotional and intellectual output of over 600 different species. The chief moderator explained to the crowd. Candidates are exposed to alien thoughts, fears, desires, and memories without any protection or filter. Most beings experience immediate sensory overload, followed by permanent psychological damage. Marcus listened to the explanation while checking his equipment. Unlike Elena's scientific instruments, he carried only a small recording device and a basic medical scanner. His real tools were invisible. Years of training in psychological warfare and intelligence gathering. The record for surviving the psychic storms is 47 minutes, Zexathari announced with satisfaction. That record was set by a being whose species naturally communicates through telepathy. Humans have no natural psychic abilities whatsoever. We expect this trial to end very quickly, Marcus smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. We will see. The portal to Nexus Station activated. Marcus stepped through and found himself in a chamber that seemed to be made of living crystal. The walls pulsed with different colors, each one representing a different type of psychic energy. At first, the room seemed peaceful. Then the storms began. The first wave hit Marcus like a physical blow. Suddenly, his mind was flooded with alien thoughts. He experienced the hunting instincts of a predator species that saw other beings as food. He felt the hive-mind connection of insects that thought as one organism. He lived through the memories of a being that had watched its entire planet die in a stellar explosion. Most candidates collapsed at this point, overwhelmed by the sheer alien nature of the thoughts. Their minds could not process concepts so far removed from their own experience. Marcus did not collapse. Instead, he sat down in the center of the chamber and began to organize the incoming information. His military training had taught him to gather intelligence in chaotic situations. He had learned to sort through massive amounts of contradictory information and identify what was useful. He had practiced maintaining his own identity while pretending to be someone else for months at a time. The psychic storm raged around him, but Marcus treated it like any other intelligence operation. He began cataloging the different types of thoughts he was receiving. Predator species thought in patterns focused on prey and territory. Hive minds shared information through complex chemical signals translated into mental impressions. Ancient species had thoughts that moved very slowly, but contained enormous depth of experience. As hours passed, Marcus began to understand the underlying patterns. Each species had developed specific ways of thinking based on their biology and environment. The predators were efficient but narrow in focus. The hive minds were comprehensive but lacked individual creativity. The ancient species were wise but resistant to change. Marcus started taking notes with his recording device, speaking his observations aloud despite the chaos in his mind. Hour 3 detected thought patterns from crystalline beings. Their consciousness appears to be based on harmonic resonance rather than chemical processes. Extremely logical but limited emotional range. The psychic storms responded to his calm analysis by increasing in intensity. Wave after wave of alien emotion crashed over him. He experienced the joy of beings who reproduced by splitting into multiple copies of themselves. He felt the despair of a species that knew their son was dying. He lived through the ecstasy of creatures that fed on pure energy instead of matter. Each new experience was filed away in Marcus's mind like entries in a database. He had learned long ago how to compartmentalize information, keeping his core identity separate from whatever role he needed to play. Hour 6. Emotional patterns suggest species with collective consciousness experience individual emotions very differently from humans. Their fear appears to be closer to what we would call disappointing the group. Their joy is more like contributing successfully to shared goals. The watching galaxy grew silent as Marcus continued his calm analysis. Commentators had run out of ways to explain what they were seeing. This was not supposed to be possible. In the council chambers, Elena looked up from her research notes with interest. She had been working on equations that described how the Void Gardens converted fear into physical matter. Marcus's voice reached her through the communication system. Hour 9 detected evidence of species that experience time differently. Their thoughts include memories of events that haven't happened yet and predictions about the past. This suggests consciousness that exists partially outside normal temporal flow. Zexathari watched the displays with growing alarm. The psychic monitoring equipment showed that Marcus was not just surviving the storms, he was actively analyzing them. His brain patterns indicated high levels of focus and organization, rather than the chaos and breakdown they had expected. "This is impossible," Zexathari muttered. "No being can maintain rational thought under this level of psychic assault." Elena overheard him. "You are still making the same mistake," she said calmly. "You assume chaos must create chaos, but humans evolved in chaotic environments. We learned to find patterns in noise to make sense of contradictory information, to maintain our identity even when surrounded by others who think differently." On Nexus Station, Marcus had been enduring the psychic storms for 12 hours. His analysis had become more sophisticated as he learned to interpret the alien thought patterns. Hour 12. Beginning to understand metapatterns. Different species' consciousness appears to be specialized for their environmental needs, but all consciousness follows similar underlying principles. Fear serves the same function across species. Preparation for threats. Joy serves the same function. Reinforcement of beneficial behaviors. The expressions are different, but the purposes are universal. The psychic storms reached maximum intensity. Every form of alien thought and emotion that had ever been recorded was channeled directly into Marcus's mind. The assault was designed to completely overwhelm any sense of individual identity. Marcus continued his analysis. Hour 14. Fascinating. At maximum intensity, the individual thought patterns begin to merge into something resembling a galactic consciousness. This might explain why so many advanced species seem to think in similar ways, despite their biological differences. When the portal finally opened to extract him, Marcus was still sitting in the same position, still speaking calmly into his recording device. He looked up at the rescue team with clear, focused eyes. "Could I get copies of the historical psychic records?" he asked. "I think I have identified several species that were previously unknown to galactic science. There are thought patterns in the storms that do not match any known civilization." The rescue team, like their colleagues who had extracted Elena, stared in confusion. They were trained to handle screaming, broken beings, not humans who wanted to extend their research time. Marcus packed his equipment and walked through the portal back to the council chambers. He immediately joined Elena in her corner, where they began comparing notes. "The consciousness patterns you recorded match the reality manipulation signatures I found in the Void Gardens," Elena said, studying Marcus's data. "I think both trials are based on the same underlying technology." Marcus nodded. The psychic storms contain information about species that built these testing systems. We might be looking at archaeological evidence of the original empire builders. The council watched in stunned silence as the two humans discussed their findings like scientists. At a research conference rather than trial, candidates who had just survived impossible ordeals. Zex, Thari approached them cautiously. "How are you both still sane?" he asked. Elena and Marcus looked at each other, then back at the alien ambassador. "We never stopped being curious," Elena said simply. "Fear and confusion are just forms of information," Marcus added. "Humans learned long ago that information is never your enemy. Ignorance is your enemy." The betting systems across the galaxy crashed for the second time. The odds on human survival were changing so rapidly that the mathematical models could not keep up. But the hardest trials still lay ahead. The death maze and the court of absolute truth had never been completed by any species. The creators had designed them to be absolutely impossible, challenges that would break any conceivable form of consciousness. The galaxy was beginning to suspect that their understanding of impossible might need to be revised. The death maze of the architect species was located on a dead world at the edge of galactic space. The planet had once been home to beings of incredible intelligence and creativity. They had built wonders that defied understanding and solved mathematical problems that other species considered impossible, but their pursuit of perfection had ultimately destroyed them. Elena and Marcus stood together at the entrance to the maze. This was the first trial they would face as a team. The massive structure stretched up into the dark sky like a mountain made of black metal and crystal. Strange symbols covered every surface, equations and diagrams that hurt to look at directly. The architect species believed that imperfection was a form of cosmic sin, the chief moderator explained to the assembled observers. They built this maze as the ultimate test of mental purity. Anyone who enters must solve increasingly complex puzzles while facing the psychological pressure of absolute perfection. The slightest mistake or illogical thought triggers punishment systems designed to correct imperfect thinking. Zexthari floated nearby, his expression more worried than before. Elena and Marcus had already survived 2 impossible trials. Their success was causing unrest throughout the galaxy as beings began to question long-held assumptions about human limitations. "Over 3,000 beings have attempted this maze," Zexthari said. "None have survived to the center. Most die from mental exhaustion within the first chamber. Those who go deeper often suffer complete personality dissolution. The maze does not just kill, it erases the very concept of who you were." Elena checked her scientific equipment while Marcus reviewed tactical notes. They had spent the previous night studying recordings of failed attempts and analyzing the maze's structure. "What happens to the bodies of those who fail?" Elena asked. The moderator's expression grew dark. "They remain in the maze. The architects believed that failure was a form of corruption that must be contained. Failed candidates become part of the maze itself, trapped forever in a state between life and death." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "So the maze contains the consciousness of everyone who has ever failed?" "Yes," the moderator replied. "Their screams can still be heard echoing through the corridors. Their desperate thoughts add to the psychological pressure on new candidates." Elena and Marcus looked at each other and smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. They entered the maze together. The first chamber was a vast room filled with floating mathematical equations that had to be solved in perfect sequence. The slightest error would trigger pain beyond imagination. The pressure to be absolutely correct was designed to paralyze rational thought. Most candidates spent hours on the first equation, terrified of making a mistake. Elena walked up to the nearest floating formula and began writing solutions at normal speed. When she made an error in the third step, the maze sent a wave of agony through her nervous system. Elena gritted her teeth and continued working. She made the correction and moved to the next equation. Marcus worked on a different section, also accepting the pain of occasional mistakes as part of the learning process. "Interesting," Elena said through clenched teeth as another wave of punishment hit her. The pain response is designed to create fear of failure. But fear of failure is actually more dangerous than failure itself. Fear makes you freeze. Failure makes you learn. They progressed through the first chamber faster than any previous candidates. The maze responded by increasing the difficulty and the intensity of the punishment. Equations became more complex. Mathematical concepts from alien species were introduced. The pain of errors grew severe enough to cause physical convulsions. Elena and Marcus continued working. They had both experienced real torture during their military careers. They knew how to function despite pain. More importantly, they understood that the maze's punishment system was actually giving them information about the correct solutions. As they moved deeper into the maze, they began to encounter the failed candidates. These beings appeared as ghostly figures trapped in moments of mathematical agony. Most were frozen in positions of despair, still trying to solve equations that had broken their minds centuries ago. Marcus approached one of the trapped figures, a crystalline being whose species was known for logical thinking. The creature had been attempting the same equation for over 400 years. "You are carrying a false assumption," Marcus said gently to the trapped being. "You assume there is only one correct answer. But look at the equation again. It is designed to have multiple solutions depending on which mathematical framework you use." The crystalline being looked up with eyes that had forgotten hope. Slowly, it began to see the alternative approaches Marcus was describing. The equation that had trapped it for centuries suddenly revealed new possibilities. With a sound like breaking glass, the being's prison dissolved. For the first time in 400 years, it was free to move beyond that single mathematical problem. Elena had found a different group of trapped candidates, members of a hive mind species who had been attempting to solve individual puzzles. Their collective consciousness made it impossible for them to think as separate beings, which the maze required. "You do not need to abandon your hive connection," Elena explained. "You need to use it differently. Instead of trying to think as individuals, think as a distributed processing system. Let each mind handle a different aspect of the same problem." The hive mind beings began to restructure their approach. Instead of fighting their nature, they embraced it and found ways to apply collective thinking to individual challenges. One by one, their prisons dissolved. As Elena and Marcus progressed through the maze, they left a trail of freed beings behind them. Each rescue taught them more about how the maze worked and how different species approached problem solving. The maze is not actually testing mathematical ability, Elena realized as they reached the deeper levels. It is testing psychological flexibility. The architects built this as a prison for their own people, beings who became so obsessed with perfection that they could not accept any other way of thinking. Marcus nodded. The real trap is not the equations. It is the belief that there is only one right way to solve them. The architects trapped themselves in their own creation because they could not imagine that their perfect methods might be incomplete. In the deepest chambers of the maze, they found the architects themselves. These ancient beings had been the first to fail their own test. They sat in perfect geometric patterns, still trying to solve the ultimate equation that would prove their perfect understanding of reality. The architects looked up as Elena and Marcus approached. Their eyes held the weight of millennia spent in pursuit of impossible perfection. "We created this maze to eliminate imperfection from the universe," one of them said in a voice like breaking stone. "We believe that only perfect beings deserve to exist." Elena knelt beside the ancient being. "Perfection is not the goal," she said gently. "Growth is the goal. Learning is the goal, the ability to adapt and change and become better than you were before." "But our calculations were wrong," another architect whispered. "Our mathematics were flawed. We failed our own test of perfection." Marcus sat down beside them. "Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the raw material from which success is built. Every mistake teaches you something new. Every error shows you a better path." For the first time in thousands of years, the architects began to cry. They had spent so long trying to be perfect that they had forgotten how to be alive. They had built a prison of their own impossible standards and locked themselves inside. Elena and Marcus spent hours with the architects, teaching them psychological techniques that humans had developed for dealing with failure, shame, and the fear of not being good enough. They shared stories of human mistakes and how those mistakes had led to discoveries and growth. As the ancient beings began to accept the possibility of imperfection, the maze began to change around them. The harsh geometric patterns softened. The painful punishment system shut down. The equations became puzzles to explore rather than tests to pass. When Elena and Marcus finally reached the center of the maze, they found not another test, but a simple door marked with a single word in the architect language: enough. They opened the door and stepped outside to find thousands of freed beings following behind them. The maze had become something new, not a test of perfection, but a school for learning how to live with imperfection. The watching galaxy saw the video feeds and fell into stunned silence. The death maze, which had been considered the ultimate proof of the universe's harsh standards, had been transformed into a place of healing and growth. But one trial still remained. The Court of Absolute Truth was designed to break beings not through physical or mental challenges, but through the crushing weight of their own self-knowledge. In that place, lies became physical pain and self-deception became impossible. The galaxy was beginning to understand that the humans were not just surviving these trials. They were fundamentally changing what the trials meant. The Court of Absolute Truth stood at the heart of the Galactic Empire, a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. For 12,000 years, it had served as the final judgment for any being who claimed to understand ultimate reality. The court did not judge actions or beliefs. It judged the relationship between what beings said and what they truly knew about themselves. Elena and Marcus approached the court together, followed by hundreds of beings they had freed from the death maze. The architects walked among them, their ancient faces showing wonder at concepts they had forgotten: forgiveness, growth, and the beauty of imperfection. The entire Galactic Council had gathered to witness this final trial. Representatives from every species filled the observation galleries. The betting systems had shut down completely. No one could calculate odds for something that had never happened before. The Court of Absolute Truth is the most dangerous of all trials, the chief moderator announced. Candidates must answer questions about themselves while connected to devices that make deception impossible. Any lie, any self-deception, any attempt to avoid painful truths causes immediate physical agony. Most beings discover that they cannot bear to know themselves completely. Zexathari floated near the court entrance, his expression unreadable. The human trials had shaken his fundamental beliefs about the nature of strength and intelligence. Everything he thought he knew about the universe was proving wrong. What kinds of questions does the court ask? Elena inquired, checking her scientific instruments one last time. The court asks about your deepest shames, the moderator replied. Your greatest failures, the times when you acted from selfishness or cowardice or cruelty. It asks about the lies you tell yourself to sleep at night. It forces you to confront every aspect of yourself that you wish you could forget. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And beings fail because they cannot face these truths? They fail because the truth destroys their sense of who they are, Zexathari said. When forced to acknowledge their failures and weaknesses without any protective self-deception, most candidates experience complete ego dissolution. They become unable to function as individuals. Elena and Marcus exchanged a look that might have been amusement. You still do not understand, Elena said. You think self-knowledge is supposed to make you feel good about yourself. But self-knowledge is not about feeling good. It is about seeing clearly. They entered the court together. The chamber was filled with floating panels of pure light that would display their thoughts and memories for all to see. In the center stood 2 chairs connected to neural interface devices that would make lying impossible. Elena sat in the first chair. The neural interface activated, and immediately her thoughts became visible to everyone watching. The court began its questioning in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. State your greatest failure, the court commanded. Most candidates tried to think of minor mistakes or professional setbacks. Elena did not hesitate. I planned a mission that got 6 people killed, she said. The words appeared in the air around her in blazing letters. I was 28 years old and thought I was smarter than I was. I ignored intelligence reports that did not fit my assumptions. 6 people died because I was too proud to admit I might be wrong. The court probed deeper. Do you believe you deserve forgiveness for this failure? No, Elena replied without hesitation. Forgiveness is not something you deserve. It is something that might be given to you by others if they choose. All I can do is try to be better. The watching beings gasped. Most candidates spent hours trying to justify their failures or minimize their responsibility. Elena simply acknowledged the truth and accepted it. What do you fear most? The court asked. That I will make the same kinds of mistakes again, Elena said. That pride and assumption will blind me to important information. That people will die because I am not as smart or careful as I need to be. The court continued its assault, asking about every shameful moment in Elena's life, her childhood fears, her moments of cowardice, the times she had been cruel or selfish or weak. Each question was answered with the same direct honesty. Marcus took the second chair. The court turned its attention to him. "State your greatest shame," it commanded. "I enjoyed killing people," Marcus replied calmly. "During combat operations, I found satisfaction in ending the lives of enemy soldiers. I was good at it, and that competence felt rewarding. I am ashamed that I took pleasure in something that should have been purely necessary." The court pressed harder. "Do you believe this makes you evil?" "Evil is a word people use when they want to avoid understanding," Marcus said. "I believe it makes me dangerous. I believe it means I must be very careful about how I use my capabilities. I believe it means I should never put myself in positions where I might enjoy violence again." The questioning continued for hours. Both humans answered every question with complete honesty. They acknowledged their failures, their fears, their moments of weakness and cruelty. They did not try to justify or excuse these aspects of themselves. But something unexpected happened. Instead of breaking under the weight of self-knowledge, Elena and Marcus seemed to become stronger. Each acknowledged failure became a lesson learned. Each admitted weakness became an area for growth. "Why do you not collapse under the weight of these truths?" the court asked, its voice showing confusion for the first time in millennia. "Because we already knew these things about ourselves," Elena said. "Humans learned long ago that self-deception is more dangerous than self-knowledge. We developed psychological tools for facing painful truths without being destroyed by them." Marcus nodded. "You can only improve what you are willing to see clearly. If you lie to yourself about your weaknesses, you cannot address them. If you lie to yourself about your failures, you will repeat them." The court made one final attempt to break them. It displayed their worst moments for all to see. Elena's tactical errors that cost lives. Marcus's moments of sadistic pleasure and violence. It forced them to experience these memories with perfect clarity, without any protective mental filters. Both humans watched their failures play out in the air above them. They felt the full emotional weight of their mistakes, but they did not break. "Yes," Elena said quietly, "those are things I did. Those are mistakes I made. I have learned from them and I am working to be better." "Yes," Marcus said, "those are parts of who I am. I do not like them, but I will not pretend they do not exist. Acknowledging them helps me control them." The court fell silent. For the first time in its existence, it had encountered beings who could face absolute truth about themselves without being destroyed by it. Slowly, the neural interfaces shut down. Elena and Marcus stood up, unchanged by their experience except for a sense of completion. The chief moderator stared at them in bewilderment. "How?" he asked simply. Elena smiled. "Humans have been studying psychology for thousands of years. We learned that shame and guilt are only destructive if you try to hide from them. If you face them directly, acknowledge them, and use them as information about how to improve, they become tools for growth instead of weapons for self-destruction." Marcus added, "We also learned that perfect beings cannot grow. Only imperfect beings can become better than they were. Our flaws are not bugs in the human design. They are features that enable continuous improvement." The Galactic Council sat in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about strength, wisdom, and mental health had been challenged by these two humans. Zexathari approached them slowly. His movement seemed uncertain, as if he no longer trusted his own understanding of reality. "We owe you an apology," he said formally. "We judged your species by standards that we now realize were flawed. You have not just passed our trials, you have shown us that our trials were testing for the wrong qualities." Elena packed her scientific equipment. "What qualities were you testing for?" "Perfection," the chief moderator replied. "Stability. The ability to maintain fixed standards without deviation." "Those are not strengths," Marcus said. "Those are forms of brittleness. Perfect systems cannot adapt to new situations. Stable systems cannot grow or improve. Fixed standards cannot respond to changing circumstances." The moderator nodded slowly. "We are beginning to understand this. Our empire has been stagnant for millennia because we valued the wrong things. We have been selecting for beings who would not challenge our assumptions or force us to grow." Elena looked around the court, where beings from hundreds of species were watching in silence. "What will you do now?" "We would like to ask for your help," Zexathari said. "Not as candidates for membership in our empire, but as teachers who might help us build something better." Marcus and Elena looked at each other, then at the watching galaxy. "We accept," Elena said, "but we have conditions." "Name them," the moderator replied. "First, the trial systems must be converted into training facilities," Elena said. "The Void Gardens should become research centers for studying consciousness. The psychic storms should become communication networks for sharing knowledge between species. The Death Maze should become a school for learning how to handle failure and imperfection. Second," Marcus added, "the Court of Absolute Truth should become a place where beings can learn to face themselves honestly.